Moolam Bhujangaihi, Shikharam Vihangaihi, Shakham Plavangaihi, Pushpani Bhringaihi. At the base you have snakes. At the top you have birds. On the branches you had monkeys. And on the flowers you had honeybees. So you had snakes, you had monkeys, you had birds, you had honeybees. Every sort of a thing was there in a sandalwood tree. Similarly, the party that he was operating in had all sorts of elements. You had to live with them, you had to cohabit with them, you had to take them along with you, you had to convince them. And because of that, he had to tread very carefully.
Tirupati session, first of all, historic because it happened. After a long time, there was an AICC. After a long time, there was an election to the Congress Working Committee. So I think it took about 20 years for the Congress party. So in that sense, it was historic. Second, it was the first AICC session that happened without the Nehru Gandhis. Completely new leadership. And of course, it was also an AICC session in which Narasimha Rao laid the foundations of what I call the post-Nehruvian era.
This session is taking place at a time when the Indian economy is facing the gravest crisis since independence. We are living in a time of change, palpable change. In the past 10 months, our government has initiated far-reaching fiscal and financial reforms. There are some who seem to think that in the new context, the basis of Nehru's vision of a socialist India has become untenable. On the other hand, there are some others who allege that we are today giving up his vision, yielding to outside pressures. Let it be clear that we are doing nothing of the kind.
His whole speech, very subtly written, was indicating change.
In fact, he did not even tell in so many words that he was bringing in a huge change and transformation, and he was breaking with the past. He did say that.
He was praising Nehru on the one side, but shifting away from Nehru on the other side.
Look, I am doing what what Panditji had told me to do. What his thought. We are only implementing Panditji's thought. We were only implementing Mrs. Indiraji's thoughts. We were only carrying forward what Rajivji had said in his final manifesto.
The way he managed that. In fact, I remember my father telling me that once Narasimha Rao said to him that every time he was criticized by his own party, he would quote Nehru to defend himself.
At this point, it may be pertinent to quote Panditji himself on his vision of the public sector and the dual sector approach in general.
He had to couch liberalization, globalization and privatization in Nehruvian language, in Nehruvian idiom. He had to convince the party, look, we are not breaking away from what Panditji has told us. We are not breaking away from what Indiraji has told us. We are not breaking away from what Rajivji has told us. I'm just continuing with that.
I think that is so he sensed that the biggest task is to have a reform which is new, to have new policy, which is different from his own party. It should be convincing, it should win the support. I think that is the strategic move. After that, he didn't require much explaining. What did he require? He had to fix the politics. And they didn't have full majority either. So there, I think he had a great advantage because he was in the state government. He was in the local government, he was in the district, he was in the state. So he knew how the politics operates, raw politics. See, for a charismatic personality, everybody comes. For a non-charismatic personality, you have to fix everything. That fixing requires knowledge, experience and capacity. All this he had. And in India, managing politics is not just central Delhi. Managing politics are with the various states.
Look at, his tenure as chief minister. He had to go almost every week or every fortnight to Delhi to report to the High Command, what he was doing and what the situation was. And for every decision he had to take a permission. That was the kind of structure that he operated in. And when he became the Congress president and the Prime Minister, when he was at the helm of affairs, he completely subverted that.
Apparently, in a cabinet meeting, one of the cabinet ministers explained and said that this reform couldn't be done, this reform can't be done. The chief minister said not cooperating. The union minister was complaining in the cabinet that the chief ministers are not cooperating. Normally, what would the prime minister? Who is not cooperating? I talked to the chief minister. We should do something. No, the minister didn't do that. He said, "Oh, but I know where the shoe pinches. The chief minister is having problems. So don't blame the chief ministers. You have to do it." So he understood what the chief ministers are, what their problems are.
Unlike what you see today, his cabinet colleagues had complete freedom. They all operated their ministries very independently, and the reporting was only on the outcomes. It was not a day-to-day kind of a thing.
If one had gained his trust, that one knew what one was doing, that the minister knew what he was talking about, what he was doing, while he would be briefed about it, he would not interfere with the details. He would say, yes, go ahead and do it.
And most important is he didn't project himself. In a way, it was low-key.
That is how he wanted to smuggle in this kind of a subversion. That is how he wanted to bring in new ideas and path-breaking ideas. But he didn't want to ruffle anybody. He wanted to do it quietly. He did it quietly.
He didn't talk too much. So he was always available to make corrections. And anything that has been done, he could deny. So the plausible deniability was another standard strategy he had.
And he did not have majority, remember. In his own, what was the number? He had only about 200 seats or so.
And even after allies, they were around 10 short.
He was being harassed every day about the lack of majority.
All states. N.T. Ramarao was elected as the chief minister during his tenure. A massive mandate against the Congress at that time. So you had to carry all these parties, all these forces. You had no money. Regional parties all over the country. All kinds of socialist mumbo-jumbo everywhere.
The parliamentary scenario was that on one side, the Congress opposition was the left-wing National Front, of which the Janata Dal was the core constituent. At the other end, it was the right-wing BJP.
So one day he asked me, you are great one at bringing down governments and making governments, can you help me get majority?
And Narasimha Rao's main strategy was to make sure that the left wing and right wing don't get together to oppose him, and that there were enough splits within the National Front that at key moments, members of the National Front would actually side with the government.
And so I went around breaking parties and I produced a majority for him.
So in June 1992, he managed to split the Janata Dal and get Ajit Singh and his faction to vote for him. Though I don't have evidence, I think money most likely played a role. I have no evidence for this.
He looked the other way when people like Karna Karan, V.C. Shukla, others, Satish Sharma, who all wanted the new MPs to be loyal to them. So they went and we could have got it without bribing. Because to join the ruling party itself is a bribe, you see. You are in the opposition, now you want to join the ruling party, you will get a position, get a ministership. Ajit Singh got a ministership, see, with only 27 MPs, see. So, but the other people, he told me also, if they all ask for your money, you say, I don't deal with money. You ask Narasimha Rao. That broad shoulders he had.
He survived his first no confidence motion. The second one was Narasimha Rao being a political master. This was immediately after Babri Masjid, and the BJP brought a no confidence motion, and Narasimha Rao managed to convince the left and the National Front that this was a moment in which the secular forces should rally against the BJP, and hence he was supported by the non-BJP opposition, and he survived to tell the tale. The third no confidence motion in July 1993 was the most controversial and is today the most infamous. The Supreme Court later found that several JMM, Jharkhand Mukti Morcha MPs had been bribed. He wasn't an innocent bystander.
No, see, there is no question that it is wrong. But the problem is, look at it in a complicated thing. There is a hierarchy of principles. It's much more complicated than what is right and wrong. I always give an example of a saint, a sage, a rishi. That rishi has taken an oath that he would never utter a lie. One day he was doing his tapas. One young woman in tattered clothes with injuries, she ran towards him. She said, Swamiji, 5 thugs and gundas, they were chasing me. They are chasing me. They want to molest me. They want to kill me. Please save me. Tell me in which direction I should go. The Swamiji said, please go in that direction. 5 minutes later, the thugs, the gundas, the murderers, the rapists, they came. They said, Swamiji, you always speak truth, you never lie. A young woman came in this direction. Please tell us where she has gone. What is Swamiji so? What is true morality in that sense?
To lie?
To save the life, he is not lying. There is a higher morality than speaking the truth in that context. There is a higher truth. The higher truth is saving a life of an innocent young woman.
The idea of paying MPs to vote for you at key moments is hardly an innovation of Narasimha Rao. If anything, he was only continuing a trend. So what you see at these key moments is Narasimha Rao doing all he can. And in my book Half Lion, I call the ability of a fox, a mouse and a lion in order to get parliament behind him, using Chanakya, Sama, Dama, Bheda, Danda, a variety of different techniques in order to survive, to tell the tale. And anyone who complains that Narasimha Rao used unscrupulous methods, they are right, but they miss the point, right? Because Narasimha Rao, it wasn't just about money.
Take the opposition ganging up to bring down the government even when they believed in the policies. That's the paradox. BJP believed in, or at least many people thought they believed in, economic liberalization, private sector, pro-market. Congress was pro-socialist, BJP was pro-market. That was general belief at the time. But BJP was more than happy to gang up with others who did not believe in economic liberalization like communists to bring down the government. Was it moral? Two diametrically opposite views come together to undermine economic reform. Was it moral? That means in order to get a political advantage for your party, to bring down a government on a certain policy which is, in your judgment, good for the country, was it moral?
Narasimha Rao had to survive 3 no confidence motions at least. There were also other motions he survived. In the midst of all of this, Narasimha Rao's stability is really a minor miracle. And it goes a long way in explaining the secret of his political acumen.
You have to carry all of them. Make it non-threatening. Get their support in parliament. Without numbers in parliament, he got all the major reforms through. Not by dictates, not by dictatorship, but by legislation, by budget's approval. Everybody came through. It required a genius to get all the disparate groups, make them serious.
The heart of Narasimha Rao's success story was how he was able to achieve so much with so little. His is the ultimate story of the success of the underdog.